All right, so today we'll be talking about Chapter 3, Section 1, and this is titled England and its Colonies. You see, England and its largely self-governing colonies did well together under an agreement that was beneficial for both parties. And this was a trade relationship. Not unlike the Dutch, England established colonies to make money. And colonists came to the New World to start over, to do well for themselves and make money. Both parties were interested in the same goal, and both benefited from this relationship. And this is what we call mercantilism. Mercantilism is the idea that countries must acquire great sums of wealth to be self-sufficient. And English settlers were in the process of acquiring wealth for themselves by exporting raw materials. That's what they were beneficial for to England. In return, as they would export these raw materials like cotton and coal and iron and timber, tobacco, etc. These are raw products that will be turned into other things in the English factories. And then they would use the proceeds from those sales to import or bring in manufactured goods like textiles and other finished products. Now, a favorable balance of trade in a country, which according to the theory of mercantilism is necessary for acquiring great sums of wealth, means that more money is coming into a country than is coming out.
Mercantilism is an economic system in which the government has control over foreign trade. It was used by European powers such as Britain, France, Spain, and so on, primarily from the 16th century through the late 18th century. The main idea of mercantilism is that a country wants to increase its wealth by accumulating as much gold and silver as it can. To do this, a country must have a favorable balance of trade, meaning they are exporting more than they import. Remember, exports are goods that are sent to other countries to be sold, while imports are goods brought into a country to be sold. So if a country can export more than it can import, it is essentially making a profit. These European powers realized that colonies could play a major role in gaining more wealth and thus more power. Colonies could serve two important roles for the mother country, that is, the powerful country that is establishing the colonies in the first place. The first role is to produce raw materials from the resources of the area. This could be timber, beaver pelts, or most important, gold. The second role of the colony is to act as a market and to import manufactured goods from its mother country. The more markets a country has, the more it can sell, and the more money it can make. Eventually, mercantilism would be replaced with forms of capitalism, as writers such as Adam Smith promoted a free trade approach. However, the effects of mercantilism had an incredible impact on the formation of American colonies.
Now, again, this sort of idea of mercantilism or mercantilism was the predominant economic theory of its time. It was the rationale behind powerful countries acquiring colonies, that in order for a country to acquire great sums of wealth, which equates to power, they must have this favorable balance of trade, exporting finished products, importing raw materials from colonies, selling these finished products to controlled markets in the form of colonies. And this led us to the Navigation Acts. Parliament, which was England's legislative body, saw the colonial sales to other countries as a threat to their economic growth. You see, within 100 years, the southeastern United States will be the cheapest producer of cotton. By the 1850s, they were the world's cheapest producer of cotton. And they weren't just selling to Great Britain. They were selling to countries all over the world, all their raw materials going all over the world. And that was seen as an economic threat by Parliament. They wanted to stop that from happening. And so in 1651, Parliament passed the Navigation Acts. And these laws were intended to restrict trade. In effect, it tightened England's control over the colonies' trade with other countries. The idea was to protect England from competition. It was meant to make England more wealthy by guaranteeing England's exclusive trading rights with its colonies in the form of sales of finished products and imports and exports of raw materials. England did the same with India. In fact, this very law was part of the reason why India eventually rebelled and declared their independence from Great Britain, because Great Britain wanted to control the trade of the Indians, not Native Americans, but the people living in India, by requiring that Indians purchase English textiles. Again, it was meant to increase England's wealth. It was part of this idea of mercantilism or mercantilism. Now, the Navigation Act wasn't just a win for the mother country. There were some benefits for the colonies. But first, let's review some English benefits. For one, it increased England's wealth by creating and protecting jobs for English citizens. If England could guarantee these large markets for finished products in the New World, they could guarantee that they would need to continue production of these goods, ergo protecting English jobs. They could also protect English access to certain colonial goods, importantly cotton, tobacco, rice, sugar, timber, coal, various raw materials that were being extracted from the colonies that England could acquire cheaply. They wanted that cheap market for themselves. However, the colonists also benefited from this relationship, this Navigation Act, in several ways. Number one, it spurred a boom in the shipbuilding industry. Since they had a guaranteed market for their raw materials, they would need a means to transport them. And so, in fact, the Northeast became known as a shipbuilding hub of our country. It also led England to support colonial industries, not only the shipbuilding industry, but eventually we began to develop several textile mills here in this country. And a number of industries began in this country even prior to the American Revolution with English support.
We resisted and they repealed the sentence. But our women never gave up and kept passing stupid laws. Will this cycle never end in peace? Will we always have to pay these invasive taxes?
Okay, now the Navigation Acts was meant to spur England's economic growth. And it did, in some ways, promote colonial economic growth as well. However, many colonists resented the Navigation Acts because it controlled trade. It hindered free economic enterprise. It was essentially telling the colonies, you can do business with England. Oh, you want to do more business? We'll do more business with England. Well, what if you want to do business with France or Spain? Oh, no. You don't need those people. You're going to do business the way we tell you to. And that's it's not right. Or at least that's how many colonists saw it. And we begin to see American piracy dating back to the pre-Revolutionary War era. You know, it's one of those weird things about laws. If you pass a law that's unpopular, people are going to find ways to break it. The navigation laws were unpopular. There were markets in France and Spain, and they were also willing to pay for these colonial goods. In some cases, they were willing to pay more for these colonial goods. All you got to do is get the goods over there. Well, we're talking about a huge open sea, 10,000 square miles. That's a lot of sea to be able to run through. And so the process of colonial smuggling dates back to the Navigation Acts. Okay, so you can only trade with England. Well, good luck catching us. And so Han Solos of the world started getting freight over to France and Spain. Really? Star Wars reference? Nobody?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
I'm just tired this morning.
And so all of this smuggling in 1684 led King Charles of England to revoke the corporate charter, meaning this idea of salutary neglect or self-government. The king said, no, I'm going to start cracking down and making sure these smugglers are not cheating England out of their goods. And so in 1685, King James created what was called the Dominion of New England. And this was, the king declared all land from southern Maine to New Jersey to be united into one colony. The idea was to make this colony more obedient to the crown, and this Dominion of New England would be placed under one single ruler. So you ever wondered why the Northeast is called New England? That's because by decree of King Charles to stop smuggling, he declared the Northeast New England. And it would be placed under one ruler, and that one ruler would be watching for these smugglers. And that's why New England. This governor of New England was named Sir Edmund Andros. And it was his job to crack down, to make sure that the colonists obeyed the rules. And he would often antagonize those he ruled, such as the Puritans, who wanted to believe the way they wanted to believe and not follow the Church of England. Or merchants who wanted to, of course, smuggle goods illegally, but they wanted to do business the way they wanted to. However, events at home, events in England, are going to have a profound effect on the colonies. After King Charles, we have King James, who was very unpopular in England. For one, he did not follow the popular religion of England. He was not a part of the Church of England. He was Catholic. To make matters worse, he would openly defy laws that Parliament passed. And he disrespected the democratically elected lawmaking body of England time and time again. And during an event that we now call the Glorious Revolution, Parliament asserted its power over the king in 1689. This is a very significant year. In fact, if you're Southern Baptist, this is when they claim their beginning. The 1689 London Confession is when the Glorious Revolution allowed for the free exercise of religion, and a lot of new denominations officially began at that time, such as the Baptist. It's also a time where the democratically elected lawmaking body asserted itself over the king. And Parliament replaced King James with Mary, his daughter, and William of Orange. I don't know why he's called William of Orange, but he was the king and she would be the queen, chosen by the lawmaking body and not by the monarch. Meanwhile, back in the colonies, the Massachusetts colonists arrested Governor Andros, which, by the way, is a bad guy in the old SNES Star Fox, so Andros. Anyway, so they arrested Governor Andros and all of his advisors. And the Dominion of New England fell apart. Meanwhile, Parliament, now controlling England, restored the colonist form of self-government, which is what we're calling these separate charters. Because New Jersey had its own charter, the Massachusetts Bay Company had its own charter, Rhode Island had its own charter, etc., etc., etc. And so all of these places had their own separate agreements with England until King James tried to force them all to be under the rule of this one person. The colonists rebelled by putting this governor in jail. This would be a great, if you're still scrambling to find a topic, this would be a great one for this week in terms of pre-revolutionary rebellions. And then finally, in 1691, the Massachusetts Charter had a royal governor, and by decree, religious toleration, so no more banishments of Anne Hutchinson types. One benefit of the Glorious Revolution for the colonies, since that's where we're focusing, is this policy of salutary neglect. England was essentially loosening the reins on these colonies. You see, the smuggling trials, when these smugglers would be caught, and sometimes they were, because England did have the most powerful navy in the world, so they were patrolling the Atlantic all over the place. So occasionally they would catch these colonial smugglers. And they would be tried in military courts with English judges and no juries. Now granted, the colonists were technically citizens of the English Empire. However, we believe in a trial by jury of our peers. And these colonists were being tried in military tribunals, which they weren't a part of the military, and they were being tried by English judges and not by a jury of our peers. And so, this led to quite a few complaints. Meanwhile, the English Board of Trade maintained broad powers to monitor colonial trade. So they, even after the Glorious Revolution, they continued to patrol the Atlantic looking for these smugglers. Yet, England did promise that they would not enforce these laws as long as whoever it was that was involved in this smuggling operation was economically loyal to England. So as long as it wasn't hurting their bottom line, the colonies were essentially free to do their own thing. So what England was asserting is that we are not going to try to control these colonies politically. We just need to ensure that we're making our money off of them because it was a significant investment. And that's called salutary neglect. And so this is really what we could consider the seeds of self-government. That though these colonies were viewed as enterprises, investments, economic pursuits. Britain was beginning to realize that controlling these colonies politically was not going to work. And so the governor called and disbanded this Board of Trade Assembly. In fact, he appointed judges to oversee trade. And the Colonial Assembly would be the group that would influence the governor, because they were the ones that, after all, paid his salary. Now, the colonists, up until 1776, considered themselves British. British culturally, British politically. They, were singing "God Save the King" just as much as anyone else. But they wanted self-government, because after all, they were separated by 10,000 miles of ocean.